A waitress glides past their corner booth, her tray a silver constellation of clinking glasses and condensation-slicked bottles. A fleeting moment of ordinary life that felt worlds away from the silent judgment Ilara was certain was unfolding in the man's eyes across from her. The restaurant, a place called The Gilded Spoon, was her friend Chloe's choice. It was meant to be neutral ground, a place of low lighting and high-backed booths designed for intimacy, for secrets. But for Ilara, the dim, flickering candlelight only served to carve deeper shadows into the landscape of her face, accentuating the very thing she wished could be erased. Every flicker felt like a spotlight. Before we continue this story, please pause for a moment and let us know in the comments where in the world you're tuning in from. We love seeing how far these stories of hope and connection travel. His name was Julian. Chloe had described him in a flurry of optimistic adjectives: kind, steady, handsome in a quiet way, a devoted father. She'd conveniently omitted the fact that he was a widower, a detail Ilara only discovered through a quick guilt-ridden social media search an hour before leaving her apartment. A single dad. The stakes, already impossibly high, had suddenly skyrocketed. A child was involved. A child deserved someone whole, not this, not a mosaic of smooth skin and puckered silvered tissue. For an hour, they had danced the careful waltz of a blind date. They talked about their jobs. She was a freelance graphic designer who worked from the quiet solitude of her home. He was an architect who loved the clean, logical lines of buildings. They talked about movies they'd seen and books they'd meant to read. Julian's voice was calm, a low, gentle baritone that didn't grate on her frayed nerves. His eyes, the color of warm honey, didn't seem to linger on the intricate map of scars that started at her left temple, swept down across her cheekbone, and disappeared below her jawline. But she knew he saw them. Of course, he saw them. Everyone always did. It was the first and often the last thing they saw. He was in the middle of a story about his 6-year-old daughter, Lily, and her recent, passionate declaration that she was going to be an astronaut/baker who would make moon cookies. A smile touched his lips as he spoke, a genuine, unburdened smile that made Ilara's chest ache with a sharp, unfamiliar pang of envy. It was the smile of a person whose life, though touched by tragedy, was not defined by it. It was a smile she hadn't been able to produce herself in over a decade. She sounds wonderful, Ilara managed, her own voice a fragile thing. The words felt like sandpaper in her throat. The pretense was becoming unbearable. This kind man, with his gentle eyes and his stories of a sweet little girl, didn't deserve to have his time wasted. He deserved someone who could smile back without feeling the pull of tight, damaged skin. He deserved someone who wasn't a walking before and after photo of a life interrupted. He paused, his smile softening into a look of concern. "Are you okay, Ilara? You seem a little distant." The dam broke. The carefully constructed walls she'd spent the last hour building crumbled into dust. All the polite conversation, the feigned interest in appetizers and wine pairings, it all felt like a lie. A profound, exhausting lie. Honesty, brutal and swift, was the only kindness she could offer him now. It was time to rip off the bandage and let him see the wound he was only just beginning to guess at. She took a shaky breath, her hands trembling in her lap, gripping the linen napkin until her knuckles were white. She forced herself to meet his gaze directly, not hiding in the shadows as she usually did. "Julian," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "I have to be honest with you. This was a mistake." His brow furrowed. "A mistake? The date? Did I say something wrong?" The immediate self-blame in his voice was another twist of the knife. He was a good man. This was going to hurt him, and that made it hurt her even more. No, it's not you. You've been lovely," she said, the word feeling wholly inadequate. "It's me. It's this." She made a vague, sweeping gesture toward her face, toward the left side that she always tried to angle away from people, the side that felt like a permanent mark of failure. "I appreciate Chloe for trying, and I appreciate you for showing up, but I can't do this. I shouldn't have agreed to it." He watched her, his expression unreadable in the candlelight. He didn't speak. He just waited, giving her the space to finish, a courtesy she was rarely afforded. Most people rushed to fill the silence with platitudes. It's not that bad. I barely even notice it. Lies, all of them. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, hot and shameful. She fought them back. Crying was a vulnerability she couldn't afford. I think, she said, the words coming out in a choked rush, each one a stone she was pulling from her own chest. I think I'm too broken to be loved. There it was, the truth of her life, the core belief she had carried for 10 years, spoken aloud for the first time to a near stranger. She let the sentence hang in the air between them, heavy and sharp and final. She expected the predictable sequence of events, a flicker of pity in his eyes, a stammered reassurance, the awkward check-paying, and the polite but firm goodbye. The end of the story. She braced herself for the impact, for the familiar sting of rejection that always followed such a confession. She watched his face, waiting for the mask of kindness to slip. Julian didn't look away. He didn't flinch. The honey-colored eyes held hers, and for a long moment, the only sound was the distant murmur of other diners and the soft clink of silverware on porcelain. He leaned forward slightly, closing the small distance between them over the table. The flickering candle cast his face in warm relief, and in his expression, Alara saw something she had never seen before when someone truly looked at her. It wasn't pity. It wasn't revulsion. It wasn't even forced politeness. It was recognition. A quiet, profound understanding that seemed to reach across the table and touch the rawest part of her soul. He took a slow breath, as if choosing his words with the same care he might use to place a crucial beam in one of his architectural designs. When he finally spoke, his voice was even lower, even gentler than before, a sound meant only for her. Broken, he repeated softly, testing the word on his tongue. He didn't dismiss it, he didn't argue with it, he acknowledged it. I know a little something about being broken, Alara. He paused, and she felt her heart hammer against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. What was he doing? Why wasn't he leaving? When my wife, Sarah, was sick, he continued, his gaze unwavering, I watched her body break, piece by piece. The illness took things from her every single day, her strength, her hair, her ability to walk without help. By the end, she didn't look like the woman I had married. Alara's breath hitched. This was not the direction she had anticipated. This was a place of shared sorrow, a territory she had never imagined entering with another person. But the person inside, Julian said, his voice thickening with emotion, the woman I loved, she was still there. She was just housed in a place that had been through a terrible storm. I never loved her less. In fact, I think I loved her more because I saw how hard she fought to hold on to herself inside that breaking body. He reached a hand across the table, not to touch her, but just to offer it, palm up on the white tablecloth between them. It was a simple gesture, an invitation without pressure, an anchor. We all have cracks, Alara. We all have scars. Yours are just on the outside, where the world can see them. Mine, he tapped his chest gently, right over his heart, are in here. Lily's are in here. She lost her mother when she was 4. That's a kind of brokenness that no one can see, but it's there every single day. The tears she had been fighting so hard to suppress finally escaped, tracing hot paths down her cheeks. But they weren't tears of shame or self-pity anymore. They were tears of shock, tears of a devastating, terrifying hope. He wasn't running. He was staying. He was leaning in. You're not a statue, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a sound that cut through the restaurant's noise and landed directly in the center of her being. Statues are perfect and whole, and they're made of cold stone. People get damaged. We get chipped. We get cracked. We get broken. It's what we do, with the pieces that matters. She stared at him, at his open hand on the table, at the raw honesty in his eyes. Her mind was reeling, trying to process his words, which were so contrary to everything she had come to believe about herself, about the world. For a decade she had seen her scars as a disqualification from love, a sign that read, damaged goods. She had seen herself as a project to be fixed, or worse, a tragedy to be pitied. Julian, in the span of 2 minutes, had not tried to fix her or pity her. He had simply sat down in the rubble with her and admitted that he lived there too, He finally looked down at her scars, but his gaze was different now. It was analytical, almost professional, like the architect he was. "In Japan," he said quietly, "there's an art form called kintsugi. When a piece of pottery breaks, they don't throw it away. They mend it with lacquer mixed with powdered gold. They believe the piece is more beautiful for having been broken. The scars are part of its history, and they're highlighted, not hidden." He looked up from her face and met her eyes again, and what he said next left her utterly, completely stunned. It shattered the foundation of her self-loathing and let a sliver of impossible light shine through. "Your scars don't make you broken," he said, his voice firm with a conviction that shook her to her core. "They make you a masterpiece." The world around them seemed to dissolve. The clinking glasses, the low hum of conversation, the flickering candle, it all faded into a blur. The only thing that felt real was Julian's face, the sincerity etched into every line around his eyes, and his hand, still waiting patiently on the table. For 10 years, she had waited for someone to look past her scars. She had never, not in her wildest dreams, imagined someone would look at them and see beauty. Slowly, hesitantly, as if moving a limb that had long been asleep, she lifted her own trembling hand from her lap. She watched it move through the air, a pale, uncertain thing. She laid it in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong and steady. It wasn't a gesture of passion or even romance. It was a gesture of profound, life-altering acceptance. It felt like coming home to a place she never knew existed. The skin of his palm was slightly calloused, the hand of a man who built things. And in that moment, Alara felt the first fragile, terrifying thought that maybe, just maybe, he could help her rebuild too. The rest of the dinner passed in a haze of surreal calm. The terrible tension that had coiled in her stomach for hours, for years, had finally unspooled. They didn't talk about their scars again, not directly. They didn't need to. The unspeakable had been spoken, and the foundation between them had been irrevocably changed. Instead, they talked about small things, safe things. But the conversation was different now. It was imbued with a new intimacy, shared vulnerability that made every word feel more meaningful. He told her more about Lily, about her fierce love for sparkly purple sneakers and her surprising ability to quote entire passages from her favorite dinosaur books. He described the way she scrunched up her nose when she was concentrating on a drawing, a perfect echo of her mother. He spoke of Sarah with a gentle sadness, but not with the crushing weight of unresolved grief. He spoke of her as a part of his history, a beautiful, essential part that had shaped him, but not a ghost that haunted his present. Hearing him talk about his late wife didn't make Alara feel like a replacement or an intruder. It made her feel trusted. He was sharing the pieces of his own brokenness with her, just as he'd promised. Alara, in turn, found herself opening up in ways she hadn't with anyone, not even Chloe. She talked about her work, not just as a job, but as a passion. She described the joy of finding the perfect font to convey a client's message, the satisfaction of aligning colors and shapes into something harmonious and beautiful. It was a world of control and order that she had created for herself, a stark contrast to the chaos that had once upended her life. She realized, as she spoke, that she was sharing the part of her that was whole, the part that was skilled and competent and creative. Julian listened with an architect's focus, asking intelligent questions, his head tilted in genuine interest. He saw her, the whole of her, not just the damaged shell. When the waitress finally came with the check, a silent panic flared in Alara's chest. This was the end. The magic bubble would pop, and they would step out into the cold night air and go their separate ways. This beautiful, impossible moment would become just a memory, a story she would replay in her mind until its edges wore smooth and it no longer seemed real. Julian paid, brushing aside her attempts to split the bill with a simple, "Let me, I'd like to." As they stood to leave, he helped her with her coat, his fingers brushing the collar near her neck, a fleeting touch that sent a shiver through her entire body. It was a simple, gentlemanly gesture, but after the conversation they'd had, it felt charged with a new significance. It was a touch without hesitation, without revulsion. They walked out of the restaurant and onto the cool, damp street. The city lights of downtown Portland glittered against the wet pavement, a smear of neon and gold. For a moment, they just stood there, the sounds of traffic and distant sirens filling the space between them. The air was thick with unspoken questions. What now? Was this it? Alara found her voice first, needing to break the spell before it broke her heart. Thank you for dinner, Julian. And for everything you said. You didn't have to be so kind. He turned to face her fully, the streetlights catching the warmth in his eyes. Kindness doesn't cost anything, Alara. Honesty, though. What you did in there, that took real courage. Thank you for trusting me with that. Her throat felt tight. I should get going. She gestured vaguely down the street toward the parking garage where her car was waiting like a getaway vehicle. Okay, he said softly. He didn't move to leave. He just stood there, watching her, a small, hopeful smile playing on his lips. The silence stretched, and Alara's mind screamed at her. Say something. Don't let him walk away. But the fear was a powerful, paralyzing force. She had already pushed her luck so far tonight. What more could she possibly ask for? Then, Julian took a small step closer. I was wondering, he began, his voice hesitant for the first time all night. My mother usually watches Lily on Saturday afternoons. I was going to take her to the park, maybe fly a kite if it's not raining. I know it's forward, but I was wondering if you'd like to come with us. Alara's heart stopped. A park, in the daylight, with his child. It was the opposite of their candlelit booth. It was a world of sunshine and open spaces, of scrutiny and innocence. A child's eyes were the most honest, the most unfiltered. A child would not have the social grace to look away. The fear came rushing back, cold and sharp. She could see it now, a little girl, staring, pointing, asking her father in a loud, curious voice, Daddy, what's wrong with her face? She must have paled because Julian's expression immediately softened with concern. Hey, he said gently, no pressure at all. If it's too soon, I completely understand. We could just get coffee instead. Or nothing. Whatever you're comfortable with. He was giving her an out, an easy one. Every self-preservation instinct she had honed over the last decade screamed at her to take it. Say no. Thank him again and run. Protect yourself. It was the smart thing to do, the safe thing to do. But then she thought of his words. Kintsugi. A masterpiece. She looked at this man, this kind, steady architect who had seen her at her most vulnerable and had not turned away. He was offering her a glimpse into his world, into the part of his life that mattered most. He was offering her a chance to be seen not as a set of scars, but as a person. A whole person. Courage, he had called it. Maybe it was time to find some more. Saturday, she said, her voice a little shaky but clear. The park sounds nice. I'd like that. The relief that washed over his face was so profound, so genuine, that it took her breath away. His smile widened, reaching his eyes and making them crinkle at the corners. Great, he breathed out, the word full of a happiness that was almost startling. That's really great. They exchanged numbers, their fingers brushing as he handed her phone back to her. Another small, electric touch. He walked her to the edge of the parking garage, waiting until she was safely inside before giving her a final wave. As she walked toward her car, her legs felt unsteady, as if she were learning to walk all over again. She slid into the driver's seat and just sat there for a long moment, the engine off, her hands resting on the steering wheel. She touched her cheek, her fingers tracing the familiar raised lines. For the first time in 10 years, the texture didn't feel like a mark of ugliness. It just felt like her, part of her history. A chapter, not the whole story. A single sob escaped her lips, but it wasn't a sound of grief. It was a sound of release, a wrenching, cathartic sound of a pressure valve being opened after a decade of being sealed shut. The tears came again, but this time she didn't fight them. She let them fall, hot and cleansing, in the quiet darkness of her car. She cried for the years of hiding, for the pain she had carried alone, for the crushing loneliness that had been her constant companion, and she cried for the terrifying, beautiful, impossible sliver of hope that a kind man with honey-colored eyes had just gifted her. A man who built things. A man who saw brokenness not as an ending but as a beginning. A man who thought she was a masterpiece. The days leading up to Saturday were a strange mix of giddy anticipation and stomach-churning anxiety. Alara would find herself smiling at nothing while designing a logo, only to be seized moments later by a wave of panic so intense she had to grip the edge of her desk. What had she been thinking? A park. In broad daylight, with a 6-year-old. It was a trial by fire she was certain she would fail. She spoke to Chloe on Thursday, who was ecstatic to hear the date had gone well. "I knew it," Chloe had squealed through the phone. "I just had a feeling about you two. He's such a solid guy, Alara. A genuinely good man." "He is," Alara agreed, twisting the phone cord around her finger. "He was amazing, actually." "So, date number 2? "Saturday, we're going to the park, with his daughter." A beat of silence on the other end of the line. "Oh," Chloe said, her voice dropping slightly. "Wow, that's fast. Are you sure you're ready for that? Meeting the kid is a big step." The familiar chill of doubt crept back in. "He invited me." It felt rude to say no. "It's not about being rude, Alara. It's about protecting yourself," Chloe pressed, her concern genuine but misplaced. "Kids can be blunt. What if she says something? I just don't want you to get hurt." Alara's heart sank. Chloe meant well, she always did. But her words were an echo of Alara's own deepest fears. It was one thing to have a compassionate adult see past her scars. It was another thing entirely to face the unfiltered curiosity of a child. "I know," she whispered. "I'm terrified." "Maybe you should cancel," Chloe suggested gently. "Just tell him you're not ready. He'd understand. You could do a movie instead, something in the dark." In the dark. It was the story of Alara's life, hiding in the shadows, in dimly lit restaurants, in the safety of her own home. For a moment she was tempted. It would be so easy to send Julian a text, to retreat back into her carefully managed world where the only person she could disappoint was herself. But then she remembered the look in his eyes when he'd called her a masterpiece. She remembered the steady warmth of his hand holding hers. He wasn't offering her a life in the dark. He was offering her a Saturday afternoon in the park, in the sun. "No," Alara said, the word surprising her with its firmness. "I'm not going to cancel. If this is going to go anywhere, I can't hide forever. He knows what I look like, and his daughter is the most important person in his life. I have to be able to exist in her world, too." There was a pause, and then Chloe sighed. "Okay, you're right. You're being incredibly brave. Just wear your hair down, the long side-swept bangs thing. It helps." Alara hung up the phone, feeling a strange mix of resolve and despair. Even her best friend, the person who had set them up, saw her scars as something to be managed, to be concealed, the long side-swept bangs thing. She walked into her bathroom and looked at her reflection in the mirror. For years she had cultivated a hairstyle that did just that, a deep side part that allowed a curtain of her dark silky hair to fall over the left side of her face. It was a shield, a security blanket. On Saturday morning, as she got ready, she found herself standing in front of that same mirror, her hairbrush in hand. She could do the shield. It was easy, it was safe, but it felt dishonest. Julian had seen her. He had seen all of it. Hiding now felt like a step backward. It felt like she didn't trust his acceptance. It felt like she was telling him he was wrong, that she was something to be hidden. With a deep, shaky breath, she did something she hadn't done in 10 years. She gathered her hair, all of it, and pulled it back from her face. She secured it at the nape of her neck in a simple, elegant ponytail. Every scar, every line, every imperfection was laid bare under the bright, unforgiving light of her bathroom. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She looked alien to herself, vulnerable, exposed. A masterpiece, a voice whispered in her mind, Julian's voice. She closed her eyes, holding on to that word like a talisman. When she opened them again, she didn't see a monster. She saw a woman with a history etched onto her skin, a woman who was about to walk into the sunshine. Julian had texted her the address for Laurelhurst Park, and she arrived 10 minutes early, her nerves a tangled mess. She saw him before he saw her. He was standing near the playground with a small girl, her dark hair and two pigtails, that bounced as she pointed excitedly at the duck pond. She was wearing bright purple sneakers, sparkly ones. A lump formed in Alara's throat. This was real. This was his life. She took another deep breath and got out of the car. As she walked toward them, Julian turned and his eyes met hers. A slow smile spread across his face, a smile of pure, unadulterated pleasure at the sight of her. His gaze swept over her, taking in her simple jeans and sweater, and then it settled on her face, on her hair pulled back. His smile didn't falter. It deepened. He saw what she had done. He understood the significance of it, and his eyes filled with a look of such profound admiration that it made her feel 10 feet tall. He took a step toward her, meeting her halfway. "Hi," he said, his voice soft. "Hi," she breathed back. "You look beautiful," he said, and she knew he wasn't just being polite. He meant it. He meant her ponytail, her exposed face, her courage, all of it. He turned and gestured to the little girl who was now watching Alara with wide, curious eyes. "Alara, this is my daughter, Lily. Lilybug, this is my friend, Alara." Alara's heart pounded. This was the moment. She knelt down so she was on the child's level, a trick she'd learned from a parenting blog she'd read in a fit of panic the night before. "It's very nice to meet you, Lily," she said, her voice impressively steady. Lily stared at her face. Her gaze was direct, unwavering, and completely innocent. She tilted her head, her pigtails flopping to one side. Alara held her breath, bracing for the inevitable question. "Wow," Lily said, her voice full of childish awe. "You look like a pirate." Alara blinked. A pirate? Of all the things she had imagined, revulsion, fear, pity, a pirate had not been on the list. "A cool pirate," Lily clarified, taking a step closer. "Like in the stories, you have a treasure map on your face." A treasure map. Alara felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in her chest, but she managed to stifle it. She glanced up at Julian, who was watching the exchange with a look of quiet, loving pride. He gave her a subtle, encouraging nod. "A treasure map?" Alara asked, playing along. "I guess it kind of does look like one. What do you think the treasure is?" Lily scrunched up her nose, a perfect imitation of the expression Julian had described. She thought for a long, serious moment. "Chocolate," she declared finally. "Lots and lots of chocolate, and maybe a puppy." Alara couldn't help it. She laughed, a real, genuine laugh that came from deep inside her. It felt rusty, unused, but wonderful. "Chocolate and a puppy sound like the best treasure in the world," she agreed. Lily giggled and then, without any warning, she launched herself forward and wrapped her small arms around Alara's neck in a fierce, spontaneous hug. Alara froze for a second, stunned by the contact, before her own arms came up to tentatively hug the small, warm body back. Lily smelled like sunshine and grass stains and something sweet, like fruit snacks. She held on for a long moment, then pulled back beaming. "Can we go see the ducks now? Daddy said we could bring them bread." "Absolutely," Julian said, his voice thick with an emotion Alara couldn't quite name. He looked at Alara, his eyes shining. "If that's okay with you?" "I'd love to see the ducks," Alara said, her voice equally thick. She stood up, her legs feeling a little stronger than they had before. As they walked toward the pond, Lily skipped ahead, but then she ran back and slipped her small, warm hand into Alara's. The simple, trusting gesture was more powerful than 1,000 words of acceptance. It was a declaration. "You're safe. You're one of us." Alara looked over at Julian, walking on her other side. He caught her eye and gave her a smile that was so full of warmth and promise that it made her heart feel like it might burst. The sun was warm on her face, the real sun, not the flickering candlelight of a shadowed booth. And for the first time in a very, very long time, Alara wasn't hiding. She was standing in the light, holding hands with a little girl who thought she was a treasure map and a man who thought she was a masterpiece, and it felt like coming home. The afternoon at the park unfolded like a dream she was afraid to wake from. They fed the ducks, Lily squealing with delight as the mallards swarmed the stale breadcrumbs they tossed into the water. Alara found herself laughing, truly laughing, as a particularly bold goose tried to snatch the entire bag from Julian's hand. In this small, sun-dappled world of ducks and giggling children, her scars felt blessedly irrelevant. Lily didn't treat her any differently. She chattered on about her school, her friends, and her extensive plans for the Moon Cookie Bakery, occasionally tugging on Alara's hand to point out a fluffy dog or a particularly interesting cloud. Later, as Julian pushed Lily on the swings, Alara sat on a nearby bench just watching them. She watched the easy, loving rhythm of their interaction, the way Julian would call out, "Higher, Lilybug," and the way Lily would shriek, "Higher, Daddy, to the moon." The bond between them was a beautiful, tangible thing, a testament to the love that had carried them through their own profound loss. She felt a pang in her chest, a complex emotion that was part envy, part awe, and part a deep, aching longing to be a part of something so whole. After a while, Julian slowed the swing, and Lily hopped off, running toward the slide. Julian came and sat on the bench next to Alara, leaving a comfortable space between them. "Having an okay time?" he asked, his voice low. "More than okay," she said, turning to look at him. "She's incredible, Julian. Just full of light." "She is," he agreed, his gaze soft as he watched his daughter scramble up the ladder. "She saved me, after Sarah died, having to get up every morning for her, to make her breakfast and get her to preschool. It was the only thing that kept me putting one foot in front of the other. She's the best part of me." It was a simple, powerful confession, another piece of his heart offered to her without fanfare. Alara felt a sudden, fierce need to be just as honest. "I was so scared to meet her," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I was sure she would be afraid of me, or ask questions I couldn't answer." "Kids are more resilient than we give them credit for," Julian said, "and they're a lot more accepting. They haven't learned all the pointless reasons adults have for judging each other yet. Lily just sees people. And," he added, a small smile playing on his lips, "she happens to think pirates are the coolest thing in the universe right now. So your timing was impeccable." She smiled back, a real, unforced smile. "A treasure map to chocolate and puppies. I think I can live with that." They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, watching Lily go down the slide again and again. The silence wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, filled with the unspoken understanding that had been forged between them. It felt domestic, normal. Two adults watching a child play at a park on a Saturday. It was a scene of such profound normalcy that it felt extraordinary to Alara. It was a life she had long ago decided she would never have. "Can I ask you something?" Julian said, breaking the silence. His tone was serious, and she turned to give him her full attention. "You don't have to answer if you don't want to." Her stomach tightened. "Okay. The other night, you don't have to tell me what happened, but I get the feeling it was more than just an accident." He looked at her, his eyes full of a gentle empathy that made it clear this wasn't morbid curiosity. It was a genuine attempt to understand her, to know her. She had told the sanitized version of the story so many times it was rote. A car accident. I was lucky to survive. But she had never told the whole story, not to anyone, not even to Chloe. The shame was too deep, the pain too raw. But looking at Julian, at this man who had shared his own grief so openly, the sanitized version felt like another lie. He deserved the truth. And maybe, just maybe, she deserved to finally speak it. She took a deep, shuddering breath. "It was a fire," she said, her eyes fixed on a crack in the pavement in front of her. The words felt heavy, tasting of ash and smoke in her mouth. "I was in college, 20 years old. I was at an off-campus party with my boyfriend at the time, a guy named Mark." She paused, gathering her strength. Julian remained silent, a quiet, steady presence beside her. He didn't rush her. He just waited. There was a faulty space heater in the basement, where most of us were. It caught a tapestry on fire. It all happened so fast. Smoke, panic, everyone just ran for the stairs. It was chaos. Her voice began to tremble, the memories replaying behind her eyes with brutal clarity. The smell of burning plastic, the screams, the suffocating heat. "Mark and I got separated in the stampede. I made it to the bottom of the stairs, but someone fell in front of me, and I went down. They just ran over me. They were terrified. I don't blame them. But I was trapped." The tremor in her voice was more pronounced now. She wrapped her arms around herself, a subconscious gesture of self-protection. "I remember the heat on my face, on my left side. I thought I was going to die. I closed my eyes and everything started to go dark. And then, Someone grabbed my arm and pulled. It was Mark. He had made it outside, and he came back in for me. He pulled me up the stairs and out onto the lawn. She finally risked a glance at Julian. His face was a mask of compassionate horror. He was hanging on her every word. We were both on the grass, coughing, gasping for air. The fire department was there, paramedics. They were putting a blanket around me, telling me I was going to be okay, and then I heard Mark talking to his friend. He was crying, but he was also laughing, a weird, hysterical sound. This was the part she had never told anyone, the part that had scarred her more deeply than the fire itself. His friend said, "Man, you saved her life. You're a hero." And I heard Mark, clear as day, say through his sobs, he said, "Look at her face. I should have just left her in there." A strangled sob escaped Alara's lips, a sound she couldn't hold back. The memory was as sharp and painful as it had been 10 years ago. Julian made a soft, wounded noise, and without a word he closed the distance between them on the bench and wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her into his side. She leaned into him, burying her face in the rough fabric of his jacket, and finally let the tears she had held back for a decade fall. She cried for the girl she had been, the one who believed in heroes and happily ever afters. She cried for the betrayal that had burned her more than the flames. And she cried because for the first time, she wasn't alone with the memory. Julian just held her, his hand rubbing soothing circles on her back, letting her weep. He didn't offer empty platitudes or tell her it would be okay. He just offered his presence, his strength, his silent, unwavering support. He was a safe harbor in a storm that had been raging inside her for a very long time. When her sobs finally subsided into shuddering breaths, she pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, feeling raw and exposed, but also lighter. The secret had lost some of its terrible power now that it was shared. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I didn't mean to fall apart on you." "Don't you dare apologize," he said, his voice fierce with a protective anger that was entirely on her behalf. What he said, that's a kind of evil I can't even comprehend. He wasn't a hero, Alara. He was a coward, a monster. He gently tilted her chin up with his fingers, forcing her to look at him. His honey-colored eyes were blazing. "What happened to you was a tragedy. But the lie you've been living with, that you are unlovable because of it, that's the real crime. And it was committed by a cruel, scared boy who wasn't worthy of you then, and isn't worthy of even being a memory now." His words were a balm on a wound she didn't even realize was still open and festering. He saw the truth. He saw that the damage wasn't the fire, it was the betrayal. He understood. "Daddy, is Alara sad?" Lily's small voice cut through the heavy emotional fog. She was standing in front of them, her face puckered with concern, a dandelion held tightly in her fist. Julian let go of Alara, giving her a moment to compose herself, and turned to his daughter. "Yeah, Lilybug. Alara was just remembering something sad that happened a long time ago. Sometimes memories make us cry, even when we're not sad anymore." Lily considered this with the solemn gravity of a 6-year-old philosopher. Then she walked over to Alara and held out the dandelion. "This is for you," she said. "When I'm sad, Mommy told Daddy that flowers help. And chocolate." Alara took the small yellow flower from Lily's hand, her fingers brushing the child's. A fresh wave of tears pricked her eyes, but these were different. They were tears of gratitude, tears of overwhelming, heart-cracking grace. "Thank you, Lily," she whispered. "It's the most beautiful flower I've ever seen." Lily beamed, her mission accomplished, and then scampered off toward the monkey bars. Alara looked at Julian, the wilted dandelion clutched in her hand like a precious jewel. He was already looking at her, a world of emotion in his gaze. In that moment, something profound shifted between them. It was no longer just a blind date or a second date. It was the beginning of something real, something built not on perfection, but on the shared, beautiful, messy truth of their broken pieces. The treasure map on her face, she realized, hadn't led to chocolate or puppies. It had led her here, to this bench, to this man and his incredible daughter. It had led her home. The weeks that followed were a gentle unfolding. Alara and Julian built their new world together, brick by careful brick. They went on more dates, some with Lily, some without. They explored the city's food cart pods, sharing steaming boxes of noodles and tacos under strings of fairy lights. They went to a movie, sitting in the dark, but instead of hiding, Alara found herself reaching for his hand, their fingers lacing together in a gesture that felt both thrilling and deeply natural. He came to her apartment, a cozy space filled with books and plants, and praised her design portfolio with an architect's eye for detail and balance. She went to his house, a sturdy craftsman with a porch swing and a backyard full of Lily's toys, and felt a sense of rightness settle over her, a feeling of belonging she hadn't experienced in years. Their connection deepened with every shared story, every quiet moment. He told her about Sarah's wicked sense of humor and her love for terrible reality television. He confessed that he was a surprisingly sentimental man who had kept every crayon drawing Lily had ever made. He admitted his deepest fear was not being a good enough father for her, of somehow failing the most important person in his life. His vulnerability was a constant invitation for her to be vulnerable in return. And she was. Alara found herself sharing parts of herself she had long kept locked away. She told him about her estranged relationship with her parents, who had treated her with a kind of gentle, pitying distance after the fire, as if she were a fragile porcelain doll they were afraid to break. She told him about her dreams of one day illustrating a children's book, a secret ambition she'd never spoken aloud. He listened to all of it, not as a therapist or a savior, but as a partner. He didn't try to fix her problems, he simply validated her feelings, offering his quiet strength as a foundation she could lean on. One rainy Tuesday evening in late October, about 2 months after their first date, Julian called her. His voice was strained with a panic that immediately set her on edge. "It's Lily," he said, his words rushed. "She fell at school, a bad break in her arm. We're at the emergency room at St. Vincent's. They're taking her into surgery to set it. She's scared, Alara. She's asking for you." Alara's heart seized. "I'm on my way." She didn't think. She just grabbed her keys and ran out the door, driving through the slick, rain-soaked streets with a singular focus. When she arrived at the hospital, she found them in a small, sterile pre-op room. Lily was lying on a gurney, her small face pale and tear-streaked, a temporary cast on her arm. Julian was sitting beside her, holding her hand, his own face etched with worry. When he saw Alara in the doorway, a wave of visible relief washed over him. "You came," he breathed. "Of course I came," she said, her voice soft. She walked over to the gurney. "Hey, pirate," she said gently to Lily. Lily's lower lip trembled, and she looked up at Alara with wide, frightened eyes. "It hurts," she whispered, "and they said I have to go to sleep. What if I don't wake up?" Alara's heart broke for the little girl. She looked at Julian, who gave her a helpless, pleading look. She took a deep breath and pulled a stool over to the other side of the bed, taking Lily's good hand in hers. "You know," Alara began, her voice calm and steady, "being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you're scared, but you do the hard thing anyway. And you are the bravest 6-year-old I know." She gently touched her own cheek. "You know my treasure map?" Lily nodded, her eyes still watery. "I got this because I was in a fire. It was the scariest thing that ever happened to me. And afterward, the doctors had to fix me. I had to have surgery, just like you. I had to go to sleep, and I was so scared. Just like you are now." Lily's gaze was fixed on her, her fear momentarily forgotten in her fascination. "But you know what I did," Alara continued. "I imagined the best treasure in the whole world waiting for me when I woke up. I imagined a giant mountain of chocolate and a whole field full of puppies, and I focused on that so hard that it made the scary part a little smaller. When you go in there, I want you to think about the best treasure you can imagine. What would it be?" Lily thought for a moment, her brow furrowed. "A unicorn," she whispered. "A real one, with a rainbow mane." "A unicorn with a rainbow mane," Alara repeated seriously. "That is an excellent treasure. I bet he'll be waiting for you right when you wake up, and your dad and I will be here too. We're not going anywhere, I promise." A nurse came in then, her face kind. "It's time, sweetie." Lily's eyes filled with fresh tears, but she looked at Alara and nodded, a tiny, brave gesture. As they wheeled her out, she kept her eyes locked on Alara, who smiled and held her gaze until the gurney disappeared through the double doors. The moment she was gone, Julian slumped in his chair, burying his face in his hands. Alara moved to his side, placing a hand on his shoulder. He reached up and covered her hand with his grip tight. "I don't know what I would have done if you weren't here," he said, his voice muffled. "Thank you. God, thank you, Alara." "There's nowhere else I would be," she said simply. They waited for what felt like an eternity in a drab, uncomfortable waiting room. They didn't talk much. They just sat side by side, a silent, united front against the terrifying unknown. In the shared anxiety of that hospital waiting room, something solidified between them. They weren't just two people dating anymore. They were a team, a family. When the surgeon finally came out and told them the surgery was a success and Lily was in recovery, the relief was so overwhelming it left them both weak. They were allowed to see her a little while later. She was groggy, her arm encased in a bright purple cast, a color she had requested beforehand. But she was okay. Her eyes fluttered open, and she saw them standing over her. A sleepy smile touched her lips. "I saw him," she murmured. "The unicorn." Then her eyes closed again, and she drifted back to sleep. Julian choked back a sob, his face a mess of relief and love. He leaned down and kissed his daughter's forehead. Then he straightened up and looked at Alara over the hospital bed, his eyes shining with tears. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. In his gaze, she saw everything: gratitude, admiration, and a love so deep and profound it stole her breath. She had spent a decade believing she was too broken to be loved, too damaged to be a part of a family. But in that sterile, antiseptic hospital room, surrounded by the beeping of machines, she had never felt more whole. She had taken the ugliest moment of her life and transformed it into a story of bravery for a scared little girl. She had used her scars not as a shield, but as a bridge. And in doing so, she had healed a part of herself she didn't even know was still bleeding. Life settled into a new, beautiful rhythm. Lily's purple cast became a fixture, a canvas for doodles drawn by Alara and Julian. The three of them became a unit, their weekends filled with trips to the farmer's market, messy baking projects in Julian's kitchen, and quiet evenings spent reading books on the couch with Lily curled up between them. Alara started keeping a toothbrush and a change of clothes at Julian's house. It happened organically, without a big discussion. It just felt right. One afternoon, while Julian was at a site meeting, Alara was at his house with Lily, helping her with a school project. They were sitting at the big oak dining table, surrounded by construction paper, glitter, and glue. Lily was painstakingly drawing a picture of her family. She drew a tall figure with brown hair. "That's Daddy," she announced. She drew a smaller figure with pigtails and a purple cast. "That's me." Then she picked up a black crayon and drew a third figure standing between the other two. She gave this figure long, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Then she hesitated, crayon hovering over the paper. She looked up at Alara, her expression serious. "How do you draw your treasure map?" she asked. Alara's breath caught in her throat. "Oh, sweetie, you don't have to draw that." "But I want to," Lily insisted. "It's part of you. It's how I know it's you." Swallowing past the lump in her throat, Alara took a red crayon. "Well," she said, her voice a little shaky, "it sort of goes like this." She leaned over the paper and drew a few gentle curving lines on the face of the figure Lily had drawn. Lily studied it for a moment, then nodded in satisfaction. She picked up a yellow crayon and carefully, meticulously, colored in the space around the lines. "See?" she said, holding it up for Alara to inspect. "Kintsugi. Daddy told me about it. It's when you fix something broken with gold to make it more beautiful." Alara stared at the drawing, at the three figures holding hands under a giant smiling sun, at the representation of herself, her scars not just included, but highlighted in bright shining gold. Tears welled in her eyes. It was one thing to hear it from Julian, a man who loved her. It was another thing entirely to see it reflected back through the pure, honest eyes of his child. Lily didn't see her as broken. She saw her as beautiful, repaired, precious. When Julian came home an hour later, he found the drawing proudly displayed on the refrigerator, held up by a dinosaur magnet. He stood in front of it for a long moment, his hand resting on the small of Alara's back. He didn't say anything, but she felt a tremor go through him. He turned and pulled her into a hug, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. He buried his face in her hair, and she knew, without a doubt, that he understood the monumental significance of that simple crayon-drawn picture. As autumn deepened into winter, Alara's secret dream of illustrating a children's book began to feel less like a fantasy and more like a possibility. Encouraged by Julian's unwavering belief in her talent, she started sketching again in the evenings, her old passion reignited. She created a character, a brave little firefly who was afraid of his own light because it was different from everyone else's. The story was a simple metaphor for her own journey, a way of processing her past and embracing her future. Julian would often sit with her while she worked, quietly reading or sketching his own architectural plans, the two of them existing in a comfortable, creative silence. One evening, he looked up from his drafting table and watched her, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You know," he said, "my firm is doing a pro bono project for the new children's wing at the hospital. The one where Lily was. They're looking for a local artist to paint a mural in the main playroom." Alara's head snapped up, her heart starting to pound. "A mural? Julian, I've never done anything on that scale. I paint on a screen, not on a wall." "It's the same principle," he said, his eyes alight with enthusiasm, "just a bigger canvas. Your style. It's perfect. It's so full of warmth and hope. The committee would love it. You should submit a proposal." The fear was immediate and suffocating, a public piece, her art, her soul, on display for everyone to see, to judge. It was terrifying. But the thought of it, the idea of her art bringing comfort to scared children in the very hospital where her own small family had faced their fears, it was an opportunity that felt like destiny. "What would I even propose?" she asked, her mind already racing. "What about your firefly?" he suggested gently. "The story of the little guy who learns that his light isn't something to hide? What if the mural tells his story?" It was a grand gesture, but not in the way of flowers or expensive jewelry. It was a gesture that spoke directly to the heart of who she was. He wasn't just supporting her dream, he was actively building the scaffolding to help her reach it. He saw her talent, and he wanted the world to see it too. He believed in her, not just in spite of her scars, but because of the depth and compassion they had given her, the very qualities that shone through in her art. With Julian's help, she spent the next 2 weeks putting together a proposal. He helped her with the technical aspects, scaling her drawings and creating renderings of what the mural would look like on the wall. She poured her heart into the concept art, drawing the little firefly named Flicker on his journey from hiding in the shadows to leading his friends through the dark forest with his unique, brilliant light. Submitting the proposal was one of the scariest things she had ever done. A month later, she got a call. The hospital committee had been unanimous. They loved it. She got the commission. Alara stood in her apartment, the phone still pressed to her ear, tears streaming down her face. Julian was on the other end of the line, as she had called him the second she hung up with the hospital. "You got it?" he shouted, his voice full of so much joy and pride it made her cry harder. "I knew you would. I knew it." That night, the three of them celebrated with pizza and ice cream sundaes at Julian's house. Lily, whose arm was now free of its cast, was ecstatic. "You're going to paint Flicker on the wall?" she asked, her eyes wide with wonder, "for all the other kids who were scared?" "That's the plan," Alara said, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "You're a hero," Lily declared with absolute certainty, "like in the stories." Alara looked across the table at Julian. He was watching her, his smile tender, his eyes saying everything she needed to hear. A hero. The word that had once been used to describe the boy who had shattered her world was now being given back to her by a little girl with chocolate on her chin. It was a perfect, full-circle moment of healing, a quiet redemption she had never known she needed. She wasn't a victim in a tragedy anymore. She was the artist, she was the storyteller, and she was finally ready to paint her own light onto the world. The mural took 6 weeks to complete. Alara spent nearly every day at the hospital perched on scaffolding, surrounded by the smell of paint and the sounds of a building coming to life. Julian would often bring her lunch, and sometimes Lily would come after school, watching in silent awe as the blank wall transformed into a magical forest, glowing with the light of 1,000 tiny fireflies. The work was challenging but exhilarating. For the first time, Alara felt completely and utterly herself, her identity not defined by her past or her appearance, but by her creation, by the story she was telling. The day of the official unveiling of the new children's wing was a crisp Saturday in early spring. The air was full of the smell of new paint and the buzz of excited chatter. Alara stood off to one side with Julian and Lily, her heart thrumming with a nervous energy she hadn't felt since her first date with him. Her mural, her giant, vibrant, hopeful story, was hidden behind a large blue curtain. The hospital administrator gave a speech. The head of pediatrics gave a speech. Finally, they called her name. And now, the artist who has brought so much light to these walls, Ms. Alara Vance. Julian squeezed her hand. "Go on," he whispered. "This is your moment." She walked to the front of the room, her legs trembling slightly. She spoke briefly, her voice shaking at first, then growing stronger as she talked about flicker and the importance of embracing the things that make us unique. Then, with a flourish, the administrator pulled the cord, and the curtain fell away. A collective gasp went through the crowd, followed by a wave of applause. The wall was alive. A deep blue forest stretched from floor to ceiling, and woven through the trees were streams of glowing fireflies, each one a unique dab of phosphorescent paint. In the center, larger than the rest, was Flicker, his light shining brighter than all the others, illuminating a path for his friends. It was a story of hope, of courage, of turning what you fear into your greatest strength. It was her story. After the ceremony, as people milled around, admiring the art, a woman approached Alara. She was older, with kind eyes and a warm smile. "I'm on the hospital board," she said. "I just wanted to tell you, your work is extraordinary. It's not just a painting, it's a feeling. My grandson will be one of the first patients on this floor. He has a significant birthmark covering half of his face, and he's so self-conscious. I think this mural, it's going to help him." Alara could only nod, her throat too tight to speak. This was why she had done it. For the little boys and girls who felt different, who felt broken, to show them that their light was beautiful. Later that evening, the three of them were back at Julian's house. The excitement of the day had worn off, leaving behind a feeling of deep, quiet contentment. Lily was already asleep, tuckered out from the day's events. Alara and Julian were sitting on the porch swing, wrapped in a blanket against the cool night air, gently rocking back and forth. "I've never been more proud of you than I was today," Julian said softly, his arm wrapped around her. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You believed in me before I believed in myself." "I just saw what was already there," he said. He was quiet for a moment, and then he shifted, turning to face her on the swing. He took both of her hands in his. His expression was serious, his honey-colored eyes intense in the soft glow of the porch light. "Alara," he began, his voice a little unsteady, "this past year, it's been the best year of my life. You walked into my world and you filled it with a light I didn't think was possible. You showed me that it's possible to love again, to build a new life after loss. And you've become the most important person in Lily's life, besides me. The way she looks at you. You're her hero. You're my hero, too." Tears started to well in Alara's eyes. She knew with a sudden, heart-stopping certainty what was happening. "I don't want to spend another day without you as my partner, my best friend, my family," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. He didn't get down on one knee. He just sat there with her, on their porch swing, on a perfectly ordinary Saturday night that had become the most extraordinary night of her life. He opened the box. Inside was a simple, elegant ring. It wasn't a diamond. It was a band of intertwined gold and platinum, the two metals woven together to create something stronger and more beautiful than either was on its own. "It's not kintsugi," he said with a small, shaky laugh, "but it's the idea. Two different histories, two different lives, woven together to make something new, something whole. Alara Vance, the most beautiful, courageous, brilliant woman I have ever known. Will you marry me?" The question hung in the quiet night air. It wasn't a question about her past, her scars, or her brokenness. It was a question about her future, a future with him, with Lily, a future she had never dared to dream of. "Yes," she whispered through her tears. "Yes, of course, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, and it was a perfect fit. He leaned in and kissed her, a kiss that was full of a year's worth of healing, of hope, of shared sorrow and shared joy. It was a kiss that promised a lifetime of ordinary, beautiful moments, just like this one. As he held her, Alara looked up at the vast, star-dusted sky and felt a sense of peace settle over her, deep in her bones. The treasure map on her face had led her to the greatest treasure of all, a love that didn't just accept her broken pieces, but saw them as the most beautiful part of who she was. A love that had, finally, made her whole. 2 years later. A warm Sunday afternoon in September. The light slanted through the windows of the Craftsman house, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The house was the same, yet different. It was fuller, louder, more joyful. A child's drawing of a family of 4 was now on the refrigerator, held up by the same dinosaur magnet. Alara, now Alara Avery Vance, they had combined their names, a symbol of their merged lives, sat curled in the big armchair in the living room, a sketchbook open on her lap. She wasn't sketching a firefly. She was sketching a baby owl with huge, curious eyes. Her second children's book, born from the success of the first, was due to her publisher in a month. Across the room, Julian was on the floor with 8-year-old Lily, their heads bent together in concentration over an enormous 1,000-piece puzzle of the solar system. "I think this piece goes here," Lily said, pointing a finger. "It's part of Saturn's rings." "Good eye, Lilybug," Julian said, smiling. He glanced up and caught Alara's eye. He winked. She smiled back, a quiet, easy exchange of love that had become the beautiful, steady rhythm of their lives. Her wedding ring, the intertwined bands of gold and platinum, felt warm and solid on her finger. A small cry came from the baby monitor on the end table. Alara set her sketchbook aside and pushed herself up from the chair, her hand going to her slightly rounded belly. The next little owl was due to join their flock in 4 months. "I'll get him," she said, her voice soft. She walked down the hallway, her bare feet silent on the worn hardwood floors. The walls were covered in framed photos, a picture from their wedding day, a small, intimate ceremony in their own backyard, Lily as the flower girl, tossing purple petals, a photo of the 3 of them on a beach vacation, their faces bright with sun and laughter. A picture of her standing proudly in front of her finished mural at the hospital. A gallery of a life rebuilt, a life created. She pushed open the door to the nursery. The room was painted a soft, gentle yellow. In the center stood a crib, and inside, 6-month-old Leo was just starting to stir, his tiny fists batting at the air. She leaned over and scooped him up, his warm, milky scent filling her senses. He immediately snuggled into her shoulder, his cries quieting to soft coos. "Hello, my sweet boy," she whispered, kissing the top of his head, which was covered in a fine fuzz of dark hair. She stood there for a moment, just holding him, rocking him gently. She looked around the room, at the mobile of hand-painted wooden planets Julian had made, at the bookshelf filled with stories she couldn't wait to read to her sons and daughter. Her heart felt so full, so saturated with a deep, profound gratitude that it was almost painful. She thought back to the woman she had been on that first date, the woman who hid in the shadows, who saw her own reflection as a monster, who believed with every fiber of her being that she was too broken to be loved. It felt like a lifetime ago, a different person entirely. The scars on her face hadn't vanished. They were still there, a pale, silvery map of her past. But they no longer defined her. They were simply a part of her story, a testament to her survival, a reminder that the most beautiful things are often the ones that have been mended. She carried Leo back into the living room. Julian looked up as she entered, and his face broke into a smile of such pure, unadulterated love that it still, after all this time, took her breath away. He got up from the puzzle and came over to them, wrapping his arms around both her and the baby. Lily abandoned the puzzle and ran over, hugging Alara's legs. "Family hug," she declared. They stood there for a long moment, a tangled, happy knot of arms and legs in the middle of their sunlit living room. Julian leaned in and kissed her, a soft, lingering kiss. Then he kissed Leo's head, and then he reached down and placed a gentle hand on her stomach. "How are my other two ducklings doing?" he murmured against her hair. "We're good," she whispered back, leaning into his strength, into the safety of this beautiful, messy, wonderful life they had built together. It wasn't a life free of cracks or imperfections. It was a life built from them. It was a mosaic of broken pieces, lovingly reassembled with the gold of compassion, patience, and a love that was brave enough to see the masterpiece beneath the damage. The universe, in its strange and often painful wisdom, doesn't break us just for the sake of breaking. It breaks us to open us up, to let a new kind of light in. Sometimes, the deepest cracks become the very channels through which the most profound love can finally flow, mending us in ways we never thought possible, making us stronger and more beautiful in the very places where we were once shattered. If you believe that our scars can become our greatest strengths and that everyone deserves a second chance at happiness, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel for more stories that celebrate the resilience of the human heart. And share this with someone who might need to be reminded that they too are a masterpiece.